Hello and welcome to Shay Zaza and to a Zaza Unzipped. Now, I've got a new unzipped guest. Her name is Gillian. Hi. Gillian, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for
Now, we
having
call
me.
her GK for short. So if I say GK, she's who I'm referring to, but I would probably call her Gillian. Anyway, today, what are we talking about, Gillian?
We're talking about identity.
Identity is a huge topic.
I know, but it's important because, of course, if you don't know who you are, where you're coming from, it's difficult to know where you're going.
Yes, I fully agree with that. I just mentioned that because we have 25 minutes and I don't think we're going to get anywhere near. We'll start. We'll scratch the surface, see where we get, and then see if maybe we have to come back and continue or talk about something else, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be Black British identity.
Okay, so let's start with that.
Yeah.
So are you Black British?
I am Black British. That's how I describe myself. Of Nigerian origin, or of Yoruba origin, as I should really say, because both of my parents are Yoruba.
Okay.
I was born in North London.
North London?
North London.
Oh my gosh.
In Islington, at the Whittington.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so...
Getting details.
And I live there now, so... so I was born
You live at the Whittington?
No, I live in the same... Just down the road from the Whittington, actually. Yeah. So I was born in North London to Nigerian parents. My father was studying here at the time, and of course my mother came with him, and so he was actually studying at the London School of Economics, and so I was born in England. Had my my lovely little family. I was going to school and just living my life, and then. My parents decided to go back to Nigeria. I don't know, what the decisions were because I was a child. And, got back to Nigeria. And it was really sort of a culture shock because I was a child. I was about 6 when I went back, but I didn't really understand, that there were different countries and different... I just knew that I was, living in London with my parents one moment and then the next moment I was in Nigeria. So... yeah, so it was kind of like my whole cultural reference, my whole experience had been in London as a Londoner,
So, okay, let's even backtrack a bit. And what do you think makes up somebody's identity? Because, sometimes we think, I may be wrong, but I think that identity is kind of, it's who you are. That's the easy way to say it. But I feel like a lot of the time people tell us who we are rather than who we actually are.
Absolutely.
So so what would you say in this? Because what you've just said to me, if I was going with other, doesn't tell me anything about you. You are a Nigerian. They took you back to Nigeria. What's your problem? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's your identity. So how can we bring it back to like the fact that, we had this conversation earlier about we raise children in this country and we think they're Nigerian and they're not Nigerian.
Yeah.
So yes, they have Nigerian parents, but they can't be Nigerian because of,
their environment
so
in
you
which
are,
they grew up.
You are literally that. Like you could be my child, the way I'm raising my child. So what is it about growth? What is it about, because you have the Nigerian parents, so how come your identity is not Nigerian?
Well, identity, as you rightly pointed out, is made up of what people think of you and what you think of yourself, or what is a fact about you. So generally you're born somewhere to certain parents. So I was born to Nigerian parents, but I was born into a white majority environment.
Yeah.
So if I was born in Nigeria, the identity wouldn't be an issue because my parents are Nigerian, I was born in Nigeria, I grew up in Nigeria, so I'm Nigerian. But because your identity generally in its most simplistic form is your nature versus nurture. So your environment and your upbringing and the family you were born into. That's basically your identity. So if you were born to, Irish parents, you would be Irish. Unless your Irish parents moved to London and you were born in London and to Irish parents. So technically you're English. Because I've spoken to Irish people about, identity, and they're like, oh yeah, that's true. I never really thought about that. Because their parents don't say to them, you're Irish because you're born in London, but you're born in London. Because they were born in London, They're technically English.
But you see, isn't that also a cultural thing? Because in Nigeria,
Yeah.
you come from where your father comes from.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter where you were born. You come from where your
Exactly.
father. But in the Western world, as
Yeah.
far as I know it, you come from where you were born. Which
So that's what
probably
creates-
actually makes sense.
Yeah, but that's what creates sort of the dichotomy between your identity, or the schism, or whatever you want to call it. Because if you were born in England or London or Scotland or wherever you were born to Nigerian parents, and your Nigerian parents are telling you you're Nigerian, but your whole cultural reference, your cultural environment, where you go to school, where you go to church, your upbringing
Yeah.
is all to do with England, then that, that's a bit
So how much
something to
of-
navigate.
Yeah,
so
but you
to
see, I'm
speak.
actually wondering how much of, like you said, nurture and what do you say?
Nature.
Nature.
Yeah.
nurture and
Nature
nature.
and yeah.
How much of each? What's the balance? Because I was saying to you earlier that obviously I was born in Nigeria,
Yeah.
brought up in Nigeria, but
Yeah.
I was raised by a British woman.
Yes.
So whilst I always felt that I was Nigerian,
Yeah.
when push comes to shove and the
Yeah.
rubber hits the road and you pull everything apart, I'm more
Yeah.
British probably in
Yeah.
my thinking, in my behavior, than I am
Absolutely.
Nigerian, because my immediate influence was British.
Yes.
Now, in your situation, because you grew up here,
Yeah.
even though you had Nigerian parents, and I know it's slightly different because
Yeah.
of the time,
Yeah.
it seems like you still were very much British, even though
Yes.
you had the Nigerian
Yeah.
influence of the parents.
Because I was living in a Nigerian environment, in a British environment, as you say, it was a different time. It was 60s. Now I'm giving my age away. A woman
She
of a
doesn't
certain
look
age.
her age.
So it was the 60s. So, Britain, as opposed to now, was very white. So my parents were living in white Britain.
Yeah.
And so they were more assimilating in the culture. We were eating English food most of the time. We would have the odd, Nigerian food, but most of the food we ate was English food. We were in an English environment. We would go to the theatre if we wanted entertainment. We would,
Yeah.
go to regular church.
did
I was
British
going to
stuff.
school.
Yeah.
And so we did British stuff, and I spoke with a London accent. So, and all these was true when I went back to Nigeria. So I was the British child.
Yes. So you
Even
stood
though
out, yeah.
I am Nigerian parents and, I look the way I look, but I
So
was the
how does
British
that?
child.
So coming back to identity,
Yeah.
how does that? I'm guessing that was a struggle.
It was a struggle because, even though I was a child, I did understand being an outsider. So I was an outsider. I didn't speak the language. I didn't understand the culture because obviously I'd never lived there. And Nigeria, Yoruba culture is very different from,
And you know what I think
British
about
culture.
the Yoruba culture? Let me say Yoruba culture, is that it's not even because you could live in the UK and your parents can teach you so much of the Yoruba culture, but
Yeah.
until you are in the environment, there's
Yes.
some looks, there's it's so nuanced that you can't fully get it.
The big
even-
one was the family size. Because obviously I was living in London with my parents, my mom, my dad, and my 2 brothers. When I got to Nigeria, I suddenly had this whole family, some of whom I had to call mum and dad.
Oh,
How in Nigeria you call everybody mommy, daddy. And it was strange to me, because I had one mum and one dad, and I was like, so who are all these other people?
Yeah.
And all these other people, with all due respect to them, didn't know me either, because they hadn't seen the normal thing, like seeing my mom pregnant, being at the hospital when she had the
Yeah.
baby and all of that. So she just arrived with these children that they knew but didn't know, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
because we were really different habits. I didn't speak, Yoruba at all, and I spoke English
with
an accent. So they didn't really understand me. So again, that was sort of like, being an outsider. And so that made me confused about, who I was. And as I grew up, I realized the more I went out into the world, I went to school, and I went, the more different I felt. And when I eventually came back to the UK after university, I'm outsider here as well, not being part of the majority ethnic, group. So it's interesting, but you just sort of work it out and become. I think the main reason to work it out is to be comfortable in who you are, and be accepting of yourself with all, because as I said to you earlier, I used to wish I was Nigerian. I used to think, oh, I wish I was born in Nigeria and I had all that Nigerian upbringing so I could fit in at least in one place.
I think we underestimate how important it is for children to feel like they belong.
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example with one of my children. I had said to him, so there was a grandma in church whose grandson was in town, and his name was Joshua, and he was same age as my son. So I said to my son, you know what, we're going to take Joshua, just because he was on holiday and his mom was in hospital. So, I just thought, let's take him to Clown Town or something. I don't know. So I had told my son about this guy in church, Joshua, and then the day we went to pick him up, I pulled up outside his grandma's house and I called her and I said, I'm directly outside the door. If you open the door, you'll see me send him out, right? So she said, okay, she will. And I'm sitting there waiting for her to open the door. And then I hear this gasp from the back of the car, like, and then my son says, he's brown like me.
Aww.
And it hit me really hard because obviously, because his name was Joshua, he didn't even, for a second, think that he was going to be a brown boy like him. You know what I mean? And it never occurred to me that was an issue, that mattered. But his school, all of his friends, he was the only brown boy or black boy, as we would say, in his environment. And so I suddenly thought, wow, this actually, he said, Mommy, he's brown like me. He was so excited. And I was like, well, I said, what color did you think he would be? He said, I don't know. I thought he'd be white because, you said his name was Josh. Now, obviously, that doesn't follow. But in his head, he was, how old was he?
Because that's
he was about
what
6.
he was used to.
And then I realized that actually I've taken for granted this thing of, he's the only black one in his class. And what's the big deal? But it is a big deal. It was a big deal for him. Because that response shocked me. I was like, oh, my word. You know? So I think sometimes when we do this moving children around, we don't realize the effect that it probably has on them.
It has a big impact on them. I read when I was pregnant with my son, because I had this book that I got from Mother Care, at the time, and it goes 0 to 5. And one of the things they talked about that is really important for children's development is stability. Being in an environment where that's familiar and they're comfortable. And so having that drastic move, not just moving somewhere else, but somewhere completely different. The weather was different, the language was different, everything was different. But to my parents, they were just going home. But of course, I had never been there before. So,
and you see, they always say children are resilient, and they are. But I think we sometimes underestimate what that means. I mean, like my son, you see, I think, because I was born and brought up in Nigeria, so everyone around me was black. I saw black people in positions of power. So coming here, at no point did I ever think that I could not be. Do you understand what I mean? Because I grew up in that environment. Now, my son, who is he's so confident. I sent him to Nigeria. When he was 12 years old, I sent him to Nigeria to stay with my cousin. And when he came back from Nigeria, the spring in his step was different.
It's different.
And I said to my husband, for somebody who was so confident in the first place, this was another thing we underestimated. That we grew up around this thing. But all of the black people that he had seen at that time were either janitors, they were cleaners. He hadn't seen, apart from in the church, where obviously he hadn't seen people in positions of power that were black. And it changed his entire, he became back really cocky.
Well, you want that, a bit of cockiness sometimes.
But again, it was something that had I not done that, I might not have, I might not have understood, because I'm like, why do you think you can't be this? Why do you think that?
For me, it was definitely an advantage. Obviously it was, a culture shock at the time, but having lived here, I understood the advantage of being able to grow up in a black majority environment. And that's why I made a black majority church, Jesus House, my home. Because of my son, because I had experienced growing up in a black majority environment. So when I came to England and, got married and had my son, I was like, I want that environment for him, even though we're in England, which was why, we ended up in a black majority church. And, it definitely helped his confidence and made him understand who he is. It helped him develop his identity, that even though he's living in a white majority environment, he's comfortable in who he is, as a black British person. So, and it's something that I think is important for all our children, for all people, but mostly, as you said, for this sort of situation that we have where our parents who are of Nigerian origin, who have their own identity, which is, to all intents and purposes, really different from their children's. I mean, there's a generational difference, but there's also a difference that, they're growing up in, their children are growing up in an environment that they didn't grow up in. There are certain things that their children are going to experience that they would have never experienced.
I won't even understand.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, you haven't experienced and just won't be able to grasp as something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this identity thing is so huge. You said something about the generational identity. What does that mean?
Well, sort of thinking of how the world that we as parents grew up in is different from the world that our children are growing up in.
And I mean, now the gap of that generation is just crazy
vast,
compared to
and so and their identity comes from the generation that they grew up in. So things like
that alarms me, because they're growing up in a social media generation.
So things like social media, things like the computers and what they can do, the way they study is different.
Do you know that you said that? Because the other day I said, I don't know, because even with me, my writing, because I'm on the computer, so my writing, I used to have beautiful writing, and the other day I wrote something, I couldn't read it back.
Same.
And I
same
thought to
here.
myself, these kids have grown up on, like, do they even know how to write? I mean, luckily, I think obviously, certainly the ones that are still in school get to write, and I'm going to talk to someone about education later, so I'm sure she'll have something to say about this. But, it's like, there's just so much that we take for granted.
Yeah.
That we don't even identify. Sorry, continue. I interrupted you.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, talking about later, because you're going to be talking about children later and helping bring up our children, is helping them as parents, even though we didn't grow up in the environment that they're growing up in, but helping them to forge their identity in the environment in which they're growing up in. But an identity that's positive, that doesn't, bring them down, that gives them confidence and confidence in who they are. So even though, people talk a lot about the negatives of social media, but there's a lot of positives about it as well. When I was growing up and I wanted to go out, my mother would be like, oh my God, you're going out, because there was no way to contact her to say, oh, everything's going up, come and pick me up or anything like that. Yeah. But now, all you have to do, everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a mobile phone. So just text and say, come and pick me up, or text and say, I'm going to be late or whatever. Yeah, so those are like the positive things of when our children are growing up in this kind of technological age, trying to understand what their challenges will be that we didn't have when we were growing up, because technology was a lot more rudimentary at the time. Things like that, and that helps shape their identity in the world that they're living in now. I mean, I remember a few years ago when my son wanted to change jobs, I got nervous, because I come from a generation where you get a job, and,
but now they want several jobs, don't they? It's crazy.
And everything. And I had to hold myself from preaching at him based on my experience in my day. And I just said to myself, I trust you. I think, if this is what you want to do, pray about it. And I gave him, those fundamental values that I brought him up with. And, and it all worked out in the end. And that's another thing.
So funny, because I didn't even think that was a thing until one day my son said to me, he said, what, one job? That's crazy. He literally thought that it was the most ridiculous thing that I was saying. I was like, but that's how we do it. Like, you can't have too many changes.
Good, nice job, and you work and you move on bit by bit,
but now
and
it's
then
like
you
how
retire.
many places?
And now you're like, apparently they change jobs like every 2 years or something, you know. So if it's coming to 3-4 years, they're getting nervous. Oh my God, I'm getting stale in this job. When they hear somebody's been in the same job for like 17 years, they're like, 17 years in the same job. But in my generation, that was something to be proud of, So it's just looking at those different things that help them be who they are, be growing in who they are, and be comfortable with who they are, and understand the world around them. Us helping them to do that. And
Well, you see, it's interesting because one of the things I do is called Rock Your Own Gorgeous, and it's all about this knowing who you are. Because I feel like so many of us don't actually know who we are, so we can't even be who we are till we know who we are.
Yeah.
And my slogan is "Know you, love you, be you," because I feel you need to know yourself first, then you can love yourself, and then you can be yourself. And so it's really a course where you like ask yourself different questions and you're very open and honest with yourself. That's kind of what it is. But I started it because I was looking at my daughters, and I felt like, well, I kind of did it for myself, if I'm honest. But you know, my daughters as well, in the sense that I just didn't, and I know it's across board, male and female, but I just felt that my daughters, one in particular, was lacking in self-esteem. She didn't know who she was. She was struggling with, you know, all that sort of stuff. And so
There's
I
a
just
lot
thought
to deal with.
yeah, you know, so I thought I'd do that. But it's so key, because I think too many of us, we don't, and we'll even come back to Christianity in this, because we haven't even brought the Bible into this in terms of
Christian identity.
Yeah, but you see, because I think so many of us, we don't, people tell you, you know, people will say to you, is it Tinuke, she's shy? Then you become shy because they've told you and you don't know yourself that actually I'm not shy. I am shy. But you know, you know, so you become, so it's almost like if you don't know who you are yourself, people will tell you who you are.
Absolutely.
So there's a level of, yes, you need to know who you are from, like, so for example, my mom, when my father died really young, and my mom made the decision to stay in a foreign country to raise up, and her reason to raise us up, and her reason for doing that was because she said they need to know their culture. This, the only thing I can give them now is their culture. And apparently she was saying that she had seen too many black girls in the UK who had no identity, didn't know who they were, and she didn't want that to be her daughters. So she stayed behind to raise us like that. Now, so she gave us something, you know what I mean? So there's that level of, you will give them something, you give them a foundation, but there's also the other bits that we have to do ourselves in terms of finding out who we are. And I think that too often we don't do that. So now, coming into the Christian thing, we've got 4 minutes. Time just flies, I don't understand. So coming into the Christian thing, our identity as Christians, who we are in Christ, how important is that?
That is the most important identity that you can have as a Christian, is who you are in Christ, because Christ tells us, or God tells us who we are, who we become through Christ, through the death, resurrection. We've just done Easter. Resurrection of Christ gives us our identity. You know, it gives us life more abundantly, life eternal. It gives us freedom to be comfortable in who we are. So I was a single parent for many years in the church, you know, divorced mother.
We're going to have conversations about that.
Which is, you know, not really the, you know, it's not the norm. It's not the, you know, the Christian woman sort of tag. But I was comfortable in that because Christ told me who I was, that you are my redeemed one. I died for you. You know, Christ says, whosoever. It doesn't, you don't have to be a certain thing to be a Christian. You don't have to be a certain thing for Christ to have died for you. So that made me comfortable in myself, and it made me comfortable to explore who I was and help to pass that on to my son, and be, you know, so when people are saying, oh, you're a single parent, you're a divorced mother of one, I'm like, yeah, well, that is one of the things that I am, but it doesn't define me. You know, but that could make you feel, I did witness it in church where, you know, single parents would deny that they were single parents. So they would say, oh, you know, my husband is somewhere, but they're actually divorced, or they would pretend that they were ever, because divorce was like, you know, this taboo in church. So they would pretend that they'd had the child out of wedlock rather than be divorced. Yes.
Wow.
Because I did experience
this is the problem again, and I think we had this conversation earlier about culture and what people are, because, and this is the reason I asked you about your identity in Christ, is because you know that because you've also done your finding out.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think sometimes we just assume as Christians that is going to happen. We also have to read the Bible,
Yeah,
find out
that's
what
what I was
Christ
gonna
says
say.
about us,
Yes.
know who we are. You know, because
It's all
one
in
thing
the
to say,
Bible.
yeah, it's all, and so you have to do your
To
own
read it
inner work,
from
your own
beginning
legwork,
to end.
you know.
If it takes you your lifetime, it's
Because
all
the
fine.
reason why I pulled that up is because if you didn't know who you were in Christ, those people in the church
Oh yeah.
could have made you feel otherwise.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
And actually made you think that you were not good enough to be there, or
Yeah.
whatever it was that they wanted to make you feel less than. So I think identity is so key. And it's I mean, for those of us that are Christians, it starts with our identity in Christ. But even if we just put that aside, know who you are, what do you like, what don't you like, what makes you tick, what annoys you, what, you know, find out who you are. Ask yourself questions. It's called rocking your own gorgeous. That's my thing. But anyway, a little plug there. But what I mean is, find out who you are, because that's the only way you're going to be who you are. And I really believe that Christ, he didn't make a mistake when God was making us.
No.
Each of us is so individual and has what is in us that he put specifically. So if you don't know what is in you, you don't know what your gifts are, your talents are, you don't know, how are you going to be the full you that you're supposed to be?
Or some things that you take for granted or ignore or don't like because it's not like the normal thing, might be the thing that actually is what is part of your purpose and part of your journey in life.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I just say embrace the whole you and, you know, rock your gorgeous.
Rock your own gorgeous. Okay, we're out of time again, but let us know what you think. Identity, like we said at the beginning, is huge. Huge. I mean, there's no way we were going to finish it in one thing. So maybe we'll have GK back if you say you want her back. We'll have GK back to do some more some more identity stuff, because we can go anywhere with identity.
You know,
we can go
there's
anywhere.
so many aspects to us. You know, there's a name of God, El Shaddai, which is the many-breasted one. So he made us in his image. So there are many aspects to us that are all valuable. You know,
And we have 2
God's
seconds.
eyes.
Rock your own gorgeous. See you next time.